My name is Michael. I inherited my uncle's house after his sudden disappearance. The place was old, standing on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown trees and a looming silence that made my skin crawl. The basement was the worst. Part stale air, damp stone, and an overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I should have left it alone. The first week was uneventful, but then the noises started. At first, soft scratches, as if rats were burrowing beneath the floor. Then, faint whispers. I convinced myself it was my imagination, until the night I found the hatch. I was moving an old cabinet when the floor beneath it groaned. The wood was different, they're newer, less worn than the rest. I crouched and ran my fingers along the edges. A square outline, a hidden door. My heart pounded as I pried it open. A ladder led down into pitch blackness, a basement beneath the basement. The air was thick, damp, and wrong. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The walls were lined with decaying wooden beams, and the floor was uneven dirt. Then, I saw them rows of wooden coffins, stacked carelessly, some half open. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. I should have climbed back up. I should have left that place sealed. But I stepped forward. The lids of the coffins were scratched. From the inside, a low creak sounded behind me. My flashlight flickered. The room was shifting, the darkness thickening, moving. I turned back toward the ladder and saw them. Figures stood between me and my only exit. Their bodies were skeletal. Their skins stretched too tight over their bones. Hollow eyes locked onto mine, their mouths opening in silent agony. One took a step forward, and then another. I bolted. I lunged for the ladder, gripping the rungs so hard my knuckles turned white. A hand-cold bony wrapped around my ankle. My scream echoed through the chamber as I kicked, scrambling higher. My flashlight tumbling into the abyss below. The whispers turned to shrieks. The air itself felt like it was closing in. I threw myself out of the hatch and slammed it shut. My breath came in ragged gasps. I waited, listening, my body trembling. Silence. I nailed the hatch shut that night, dragged the cabinet back over it, and left the basement untouched. But it wasn't over. The scratching started again 3 nights. Later, not from beneath the floor this time, from inside the walls. My name is James. When my wife and I moved into this old house, we knew it needed renovations. The basement was the worst damp, mold creeping up the stone walls, and a smell like rotting wood. I figured a good cleaning would fix it. I was wrong. At first, it was small things. Tools missing, the light bulb flickering, strange creaks at night, the kind you tell yourself are just the house settling. But then, one night, I found something I couldn't explain. I had been working late, tearing down a rotted shelf along the far wall. When I pulled the boards away, I found a door. Not just any door, it was steel, rusted and bolted shut. My gut twisted. Who seals a door inside their own basement? And why? I should have left it alone. Curiosity, as always, got the better of me. The bolts were old, weak. With enough force, they snapped free. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow stairway leading deeper into the earth. A second basement. The air down there was thick, stale, heavy with the scent of decay. My flashlight cast long shadows as I stepped inside. The walls were different, not the stone of our basement, but ancient brick, dark with moisture. At the center of the room stood a chair, wooden, its armrests bound in rusted chains. And beside it, a table covered in old, brittle documents. One caught my eye, a ledger, its ink faded, names, dates, methods. Then I saw the last entry. My name. The date was today. My breath caught in my throat. A sharp creak sounded from behind me. The door, the one I had forced open, was slowly swinging shut. I lunged for it, but before I could reach the threshold, the flashlight flickered and I saw them. Figures, shifting in the dark, their bodies twisted and gaunt. Eyes that had long since rotted away, yet still fixated on me. mouths hanging open in silent, eternal screams. The door slammed, the light went out, and then they moved. I felt something brush against my arm, cold and damp like flesh, long dead. My pulse pounded, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My flashlight flickered back to life for a split second, just long enough for me to see a dozen skeletal figures closing in, their hollow mouths stretching wider than humanly possible. I bolted. My hands groped in the dark, slamming against the walls as I scrambled toward where the door had been. My foot caught on something, a bone, a hand, and I crashed to the ground. The whispers swelled, turning into guttural, desperate moans. Then I heard it, a voice among the chorus, separate from the others, deeper, commanding. James, ... you should not have come. The flashlight flickered again. This time, I saw what was at the center of the room. Not just a chair. A pit, deep, endless, and filled with writhing bodies, hands clawing upward, mouths gaping in silent agony. The smell of rot and iron filled my nostrils as something unseen yanked me closer. I kicked, scrambled, my fingers clawing at the stone floor. The whispers grew deafening. I felt fingers curl around my ankle, pulling with a final desperate lunge. I threw myself forward. My hands struck the metal of the door. I had seconds to act. I pushed with every ounce of strength left in me. The door groaned, resisted, then gave way. I stumbled through, my body slamming onto the cold basement floor. The second I was out, the whispering stopped. Silence. I scrambled to my feet, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs. The steel door stood open, but the darkness beyond it was still waiting. A low, distant creak echoed from within. I didn't stay to see what would happen next. I ran. That night, I bolted the basement door shut. I told my wife nothing. I told myself it was over. But the house doesn't let go. That is Lee. The scratching started 3 nights later, coming from beneath the floorboards. My name is Daniel, and I have always feared the basement of my childhood home. Not because of the usual childhood fears, monsters in the dark, or imaginary creatures, but because of something real. Something my mother warned me about before she disappeared. She would always say, never step on the loose floorboard. Never listen to the voices beneath. At the time, I thought it was just another one of her strange quirks, a remnant of the paranoia that had taken over her mind. But when I returned home after years away, the basement beckoned me with an eerie silence. I should have left it alone. I should have sealed the door shut the way my father did after she vanished. But curiosity, as it always does, led me down those rotting wooden stairs. The basement was just as I remembered, damp, filled with old furniture, covered in sheets, and heavy with the scent of mildew. But then I saw it. The loose floorboard near the center of the room, the one I was never allowed to touch. My heartbeat quickened as I approached it. The air around it felt different, charged, as if something below was waiting. I knelt and pried the board loose. Beneath it was a dark cavity, a tunnel leading downward. A metallic odor seeped out, and then I heard it, the whispering. Countless voices, hushed and frantic, like a chorus of pleading souls. My limbs stiffened. Logic screamed at me to stop, to close it back up and leave, but I leaned in closer, straining to understand their words. Then the floor beneath me gave way. I plunged into the abyss, the tunnel collapsing behind me. My flashlight flickered wildly as I landed on cold, damp ground. The air was suffocating, thick with the scent of decay. My breathing was shallow as I realized where I was. A chamber, a forgotten place beneath my home. The walls were lined with crude markings, symbols I didn't recognize. And in the center stood a wooden chair, old and splintered, with rusted restraints on its arms and legs. The whispers became a wail, the sound coming from every direction. My pulse thundered in my ears as a shadow moved in the darkness beyond. Then I saw them, figure skeletal, hollow-eyed, their flesh barely clinging to their bones. Their mouths moved in silent agony. My flashlight flickered, and I caught a glimpse of something worse. My mother, her eyes sunken and lifeless, locked onto mine as she raised a single, bony hand. "You should not have come." Darkness swallowed me whole. My name is Mark, and I should have never entered my grandmother's basement. She passed away last month, leaving behind an old Victorian house filled with antique furniture and dust-covered memories. While sorting through her belongings, I discovered a locked door in the basement that no one in the family had ever mentioned. The lock was rusted but weak. With little effort, I pried it open and stepped inside. What I found was not a storage room, but a place that felt untouched by time. The air was thick, stagnant, and carried a metallic temps. A single wooden chair sat in the middle, its arms wrapped in brittle leather straps. Chains hung from the ceiling, rusted but still intact. The walls were covered in scratch marks, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way out. Then, I saw the photos. Old black and white images lay scattered on a dusty table. They all depicted the same thing: a boy, no older than 10, strapped to the chair. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken with terror. The dates on the back spanned decades, yet the boy never aged. A chill crawled down my spine. My flashlight flickered as the air shifted, carrying a faint whisper. My breath hitched. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. And then, a sound, a shuffle, slow and deliberate. From the darkness beyond the chair, I turned sharply, my heart hammering against my ribs. A shadow loomed in the corner, shifting unnaturally. The whispering grew louder, transforming into a low, guttural moan. My legs locked in place as the figure took a step forward. The boy from the photos. His face was the same, frozen in time, but his eyes, they were empty voids. His lips parted, and a single word escaped, in a voice so distorted it made my skin crawl. "Stay." The door behind me slammed shut. My flashlight sputtered, casting frantic beams across the room. The boy took another step, his movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on invisible strings. A cold wind howled through the room, rattling the chains hanging from the ceiling. Then, the walls began to change. The scratch marks deepened, shifting into symbols I didn't recognize. The air grew thicker, suffocating. My ears rang with whispers, rising into a chorus of tormented voices. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the voices pushed through, seeping into my skull. Then, something else moved in the darkness, not just the boy. Shadows stretched unnaturally, forming twisted figures that slithered along the walls, their elongated limbs reaching toward me. My breath came in short gasps. My legs refused to move. The boy's mouth stretched open, wider than it should have, a black void swallowing his entire lower face. A scream erupted, raw and otherworldly, shaking the very air around me. The shadows surged forward. I bolted toward the door, clawing at the handle. It wouldn't budge. The room seemed to pulse, the very walls breathing, closing in. Hand-skinned skeletal grasped at my arms, my legs. Their touch burned like ice. In a final act of desperation, I slammed my shoulder into the door. Once, twice, the wood cracked. On the third strike, I burst through, tumbling into the basement beyond. The moment I crossed the threshold, the screams cut off. I scrambled to my feet and slammed the door shut, pressing my weight against it. Silence. The air outside the room was still, the basement unchanged, but the whispering, it hadn't stopped. It had just moved. It was inside me. My name is Ethan. I never thought my childhood home would become the stage for my worst nightmare. It all started the night I moved back in, after years away, following my father's passing. The house stood frozen in time, dusty, silent, and heavy with memories. But the basement was different. Growing up, My father forbade me from entering it. "It's just old storage," he'd say, whenever I asked. But something about the way his voice trembled made me doubt him. Now, with him gone, the lock on the basement door was mysteriously unlatched. It was as if the house was inviting me to uncover whatever secrets lay beneath. The first time I stepped down those creaky wooden stairs, a suffocating cold wrapped around me. The air was thick, damp, and carried an odd metallic scent. My flashlight flickered as if warning me to turn back. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, broken tools, and forgotten relics of the past. But then, in the farthest corner, I saw a door, slightly ajar. I didn't remember a second door in the basement. It was made of dark wood, its frame lined with deep scratches, as though something had desperately tried to claw its way out. Every rational part of me screamed to leave it alone. Instead, I reached for the handle. The second I touched it, a sound erupted from behind the door. A low, guttural growl, followed by what I can only describe as whispering hundreds of voices, overlapping, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold. My instincts told me to run, but my curiosity kept me frozen. Slowly, I pushed the door open. Darkness, the flashlight's beam barely cut through it. The room beyond was vast, much larger than the basement should have allowed. The walls were rough stone, the floor uneven. In the center stood a wooden chair, with restraints on its arms and legs. The air carried the scent of decay, old and sour. But the worst part, the whispering stopped the moment I stepped inside. Then, a movement. A figure, hunched and trembling, emerged from the shadows. It was human at least. It had been once. Its skin was stretched too thin over its bones, its eyes sunken and hollow. The moment it saw me, it let out a sharp, agonized scream and lunged, stumbled backward, slamming the door shut just as its clawed fingers scraped against the wood. The whispering returned, louder now, like a chant. The door shook violently, as if something or many things were trying to break free. I ran up the stairs, locking the basement door behind me. My chest heaved, my hands trembled. I told myself it was a hallucination, a trick of my mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. My father hadn't been storing old furniture down there. He had been keeping something trapped, and now I had set it free.